ladies and gentlemen, Panzer here, and today I want to talk about a Reddit post. And not just any Reddit post, this post was a report written up by Captain Planet of Overbuff.com. And it breaks down the character picks from data taken from professional tournaments, and the results are interesting. However, I feel that despite the disclaimer that's written at the very top of the report, a lot of people are possibly misinterpreting the results. But before we get into that, let's talk about what the report actually says. So, there are a total of 6 tiers, split up according to the relative percentage of picks in tournaments. At the very top is the supposed overpowered tier, where a character is picked more than 95% of the time, and it drops down in increments until you get to the very bottom, where characters are picked less than 5% of the time. Now, there is a full write-up explaining the current meta and why certain characters are in the tiers that they're in. Lucio is in the A tier, where he's picked approximately 94% of the time, just a sliver away from the S tier, or the overpowered tier. And that's simple enough to understand. His passive healing and defensive ultimate ability is invaluable to pretty much any team composition, and there aren't many team compositions outside of very specific strats that don't benefit from having Lucio on the team. The rest is as you'd expect. Reinhardt, Zenyatta, and Zarya come up next as the main hero picks of teams. Reinhardt is the main tank without a doubt, and Zarya can be very versatile, both offensively and defensively with good shielding. Zenyatta deals reasonable damage while still being able to heal, and his Discord orbs are excellent for singling out targets and focused fire. The middle tier is basically where characters that are seemingly best at their intended roles are. For example, McCree is arguably the best mid-range damage character around right now, and in the hands of a skilled player, he can be pretty devastating. But overall, characters in this tier represent those picked depending on the overall team strategy, since some work with a particular strat and not so much with others, so it's entirely dependent on that. But even so, data-wise, they do fall into this category in terms of percentage of picks. The next tier are characters that are picked over 5% of the time, but less than 20% of the time. And they are, simply put, situational characters or specialists. Like the tier above them, they depend entirely on the overall team strategy, but with one key difference. These characters, Hanzo, Mei, D.Va, and Pharah, are augmenters or mutators to certain strategies. So, for example, the team strategy needs a slight change to adapt to a certain game situation. That's when these characters come out, and apparently the players picking them also fulfill a slightly looser role and are more likely to switch when the situation changes. Essentially, they're even more situational than the tier above, and while it makes sense for them to be there since they are useful to a team, they're not the main picks, nor are they versatile enough for every situation. And in some cases, the problem just lies with counters. For example, Pharah can be countered in many ways, but her strengths can also be useful, thus making Pharah a more preemptive pick rather than a reactive pick. Now, the bottom of the rung is where things get very interesting. We see characters that are still fairly commonly seen this season in normal ranked play, and they are basically what represents the difference between in-game ranked play and professional tournaments. The characters in this tier have almost no place within the current meta and do not fit into any of the currently favoured strategies. But again, I must stress that this is not representative of what is happening in the game right now. It's reflective instead of professional tournaments, so let's take a look at what's on the list. First off, Junkrat, and it seems like Junkrat is just not consistent enough. His grenades, while seemingly useful at hitting things around corners, often don't do much more than feed Zarya some energy. And since his Riptire can be destroyed pretty easily before it reaches its target, it makes Junkrat far too unreliable as a pick. And of course, Junkrat's favourite strategy of using his trap and mine is not really so good in professional tournaments, since most players aren't really going to fall for that as they might in quick play in normal games. Now, next up is Soldier 76, and while his mid-range DPS isn't completely awful, it's sustained damage, which can be out-healed by an enemy Ana pretty quickly, and since you can't put down enemies fast enough, all you're essentially doing is powering up the enemy Anas Nano Boost, and indeed the ultimates of any enemy support within range. Next up is Widowmaker. There really isn't much to say about Widow. She does deal respectable damage, and isn't the only one who does, but compared to picking characters like McCree or Hanzo for the same role, the main difference is that McCree and Hanzo have ultimate abilities that are more useful in more situations than that of Widowmaker's. The last three, Torbjorn, Symmetra, and Bastion, are pretty much all in this tier for the same reason. Their usefulness is almost entirely dependent on positioning, and at the professional level, map knowledge is at a level where you will almost always be countered while playing these characters. There's no spot safe enough for Symmetra's teleporter or Torbjorn's turret, and the presence of a Bastion on the other team will likely lead to someone just immediately swapping to counter and then switch back to continue with whatever composition they had before. So, while the damage potential of Bastion can melt tanks if left unchecked, the problem is, no professional team worth their salt would go leaving such a threat unchecked. But what does this all mean then? Should the supposed worst heroes on the ranking not be played? And should we then switch to picking the top most picked heroes on this list for competitive play? Absolutely not, because the data that we're seeing is taken from professional tournaments played on PC. It's a very specific subset of data that is not representative of Overwatch gameplay for the general public, either as a whole or even just the in-game competitive ranked play. I'm sure if we were to look at the top tier of current Overwatch competitive play right now, we might see very similar data, but right now I think we can definitely agree that the strats being described in the report are not in use at every level. At the same time, if a character isn't picked as often in professional tournament, does that mean they're not good at all? Not at all, because whether a character is good or not depends entirely on three different things: the team composition, the situation in the current game, and the skill of the player. So while Bastion might appear to be unusable to some, I've had success in competitive by using Bastion in specific situations, and the same could be said of Pharah too. But what this does mean is that the least picked characters could well be due for a slight buff in the next patch, or maybe some tweaks to the way their abilities work to make them a little bit more viable in competitive and professional tournaments. But don't get me wrong though, this is still really useful information regarding the state of Overwatch's competitive meta. But I think what everyone needs to take away from it is that it's also based on what professional players are currently doing, and while some people queuing up in Season 2 might think that they're professional level players, it's worth remembering that the in-game competitive and actual professional competitive scene are two completely different things. But what do you guys think? Is the top 1% of competitive play really like the report says, or is it still a different metagame entirely? Link to the full report is down in the description below, and it's lengthy, but still definitely worth a read. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you're new to the channel. My name is Panzer, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.